Mark your calendars. March 27th is the official grand opening of our phase 2. And so lots of work still to be done, but it's awesome to be able to open things up and get a lot of the tension out of the lobby and hallways. God is doing incredible work, and we're grateful for that. No trespassing. I have some family that lived in the same place, or still live there, but live in the same place in White House for over 20 years. And they had the same neighbors, everything, for almost 20 years. The neighbors sold their house, and some new people moved in. And my family members went out one morning to go to work as normal. They go out, and there is boundary tape around their building, halfway through their driveway. And so they're like, what is going on? And so they go to the neighbor and was like, hey, why do you have this tape around our building, around a portion of our backyard? And the lady's like, well, according to the drawings, or according to the blueprint, whatever, like, that's actually our property. And first of all, you're like, well, it would have been nice if you just came back and told me instead of like taping that off. But it started this crazy legal battle to where they could not even get access to the building they had with all their stuff in it because it technically wasn't on their property. Like, it was a big ordeal. And like, how many of you know, like, people make a fuss about I'm looking at Kevin. I know you're walking through some stuff right now with property. Like, we care about our property lines. We care about people being on our property. We even put up signs, no trespassing, all this stuff. Property lines matter, right? We want people to know where our property is. But here's the thing. When it comes to relationships, it's easy to find out where people's physical property boundaries lie because we can put up signs, but how many of you know we can't see people's emotional boundaries? And the reason why this is important as we're talking about red flags or warnings in relationships is because I think a lot of people have put up more energy and intentionality in guarding their physical stuff, but don't do a good job of guarding their hearts, guarding their emotions. And we talk about this. The reason why this is important because we've been talking about soul health, and your soul is your thoughts, your mindsets, your emotions, your feelings, your will. All of this is wrapped up into your soul, and how many of you know your soul represents your entire being? And that's the issue, is that most of us only see the physical side of somebody, so that's why a lot of us will focus more on the physical appearance or external issues of our life, but miss the point that your external self is actually a product of your internal self. And so we don't take a lot of energy or time in our lives saying, how am I cultivating and protecting my soul? How am I protecting my thoughts, my feelings, my emotions? All of these things affect what we do. And so we tend to only focus on the behavior aspect of our lives and not the internal aspect of our lives. And so when people step across our physical boundaries, we call that trespassing. But how many of you know sometimes we allow people to step across our emotional boundaries? And that damages our relationships, because some of us are products of relationships where you have allowed people, you've had no boundaries in your heart, your thought. I mean, there are so many issues with us sometimes today, emotionally and dysfunctionally, that we've allowed as a product of our upbringing that we have not addressed or dealt with. And here's what you need to know is that people will always step over the line until you build a gate, not a wall. Here's the difference. A lot of you have built walls in your relationships. And that's why you can be married with somebody, make a covenant to spend your life with them and not truly know them. We said this last week, that intimacy is not just physical part of the relationship. Intimacy is to be fully known with somebody. And sometimes you can actually allow somebody to have physical intimacy with you, but not even know their soul, not even know their deepest thoughts, their deepest issues, their deepest struggles, because we keep people out. How many of you know gates are different than walls? Gates, you can not only keep the wrong people out, but you let the right people in. But a lot of people end up building walls, and they don't let anybody in. And you're like, ain't nobody, because you've been hurt, right? And so if you've been hurt or you've walked through trauma in your life, then there is a tendency to say, nobody else is going to affect me again, and so therefore I'm going to keep those people out. But the problem is that we can't, it's so funny because our biggest dysfunction in our lives sometimes has to do with some sort of relationship in our lives. And so you're like, I got to protect myself from that, but then you also can't live life without other people. And so we're walking through life confused because we're like, people suck, but yet I need people, right? And so it's like that's the struggle. And so we have to address these issues. And so this is the red flag we're going to address today. Last week, we talked about this red flag of being self-aware, right? And we kind of walked through some red flags in relationships. Today, I want to talk about this red flag of self-control, because here's what you need to know is when you struggle with self-control, other people will try to control you. If you've ever felt like you were a person that you were the one who did for everybody else, right? Like everybody takes advantage of you, people take you for granted, like you're just always serving other people, but nobody cares about your emotions, nobody cares that you are the one who's always having to take care of, do all this stuff. Just know that is no one else's fault but your own. That at some point you have to be fully responsible for the boundaries you have set in your life. And that's hard, right? Because we're trying to figure out who do I let in, how do I do this? So we're going to process all of this and talk about it. We're going to talk about how we address this red flag, because I want you to know that if you are, especially if you're dating with somebody, remember I told you last week, if you're already married to them, like I'm not giving you a green card to get out. But what I am saying is you're going to have to address this stuff, right? But if you're dating somebody and you're with this person and you see, man, they don't have any boundaries in their life, it is a red flag you got to address. You got to deal with this stuff. And so we're going to go to Psalm 101. I'm going to talk about King David for a moment. Now, at the time where he is about to write this psalm is so powerful. If you know anything what a psalm is basically a poem or a song. A lot of times these writers would write down their thoughts or whatever was going on in their life, and they would put music to it, or they would kind of use this almost as prayers or conversations with God, but also a chance to kind of release what's going on the inside. I always feel like I love journaling, because I believe journaling is a moment where you can be really authentic with God and just write down what it is that's going through your head, going through your mind, going through your thoughts and feelings. A lot of us don't have safe outlets to talk about those things. That's why we kind of suppress, and those things become toxic inside of us. David never had that problem. Here, and I get it, because if you're a man, you're like, I don't share feelings because I'm a man. But like, David was a bad man. I mean, David's like cutting off giants' heads. He's like, I mean, they did some gross stuff back in the day. If you go and read through the Bible, you're like, oh my gosh, that's terrible. You know, like he did some, he was a soldier, a warrior. But yet there wasn't a moment that he was not transparent and authentic before God. Shared exactly what he thought, shared exactly what he was feeling. And so in this moment that we're about to read, he is ascending to the throne finally over all of Jerusalem, because he had actually been anointed king 3 times. He was anointed as a teenager, as a shepherd boy. Saul was still king, but Samuel shows up like, hey, you're going to be the next king of Israel. And then he gets anointed king a little bit later, but there was a division in Israel. There was Saul's part of Israel and David's part of Israel. Now Saul is out of the picture. David is ascending to the throne over all of Israel. And so David writes down his authentic thoughts, because he had watched how Saul had ruled. Have you ever just learned from other people's mistakes? David's watched how Saul ruled. He's like, I don't want to rule like Saul ruled. And so he's letting people, because Saul was, think about Saul's journey to the throne. Number one, he was picked to rule like we pick people. Because we think, oh man, they're tall, they look like they're strong, he's handsome. They're like, man, Saul's got to be our first king. I mean, look at that dude. He just looks like a king. And what's funny, when you read the story, they go to anoint him king and they can't find him. Here is this tall, strong, warrior-looking dude, and he's so insecure, he's hiding. And can I tell you, that dysfunction would play out in his own ability to lead the nation of Israel. He was an insecure king. He was a paranoid king. Throughout his entire reign, he was so paranoid, David was trying to steal the throne that he was trying to have him killed several times. He was an angry king. He was jealous, insecure, angry, paranoid. You're like, that sounds like my ex-husband. But all of this stuff was a dysfunction that destroyed his rule. And so David's like, I'm going to let y'all know what kind of king I'm going to be. I'm going to set the boundaries up front. I'm going to tell you what kind of man I'm going to be. I'm also going to tell you what kind of people that I'm going to surround myself with. So let's look at Psalm 101, verse 1. I will sing of your love and justice, Lord. I will praise you with songs. I will be careful to live a blameless life. When will you come to help me? I will lead a life of integrity in my own home. I will refuse to look at anything vile and vulgar. I hate all who deal crookedly. I will have nothing to do with them. I will reject perverse ideas and stay away from every evil. I will not tolerate people who slander their neighbors. Wow, we can close on that one today, right? I will not endure conceit and pride. I will search, check this out, for faithful people to be my companions. How many of you know surrounding yourself with godly people does not just happen by osmosis? You need to search for those people in your life. Only those who are above reproach will be allowed to serve me. I will not allow, think about the wordage he's using here. I'm not going to allow deceivers to serve in my house, and liars will not stay in my presence. My daily task will be to ferret, that's just another word for search, will be to ferret or search out the wicked and free the city of the Lord from their grip. Wow, this is pretty powerful. Because he's letting people know this is who I am, and these are the people who get access into my life. I love even that last verse where he's like, listen, I know a lot of people are serving the kingdom right now that Saul let in. I'm going to search out the right people and make sure that if they don't have the kind of character they need, I'm getting rid of those people. Those people are getting out. This is pretty powerful. How many of you know your skin serves as a boundary, doesn't it? Your skin serves as a boundary to all of your blood, your vessels, all this stuff to help keep your body from infection. How many of you know you can get a cut, and if it does not go addressed, that cut can actually lead to infection in your entire body. Isn't that incredible? And it's a perfect analogy of your soul. Your soul can actually be injured. And what you don't realize is when that injury is not addressed, it sets up infection. And that infection does not just affect you, it infects your kids, your grandchildren, and their kids. Some of you are, it's like you have been injured, but your kids are infected. And at some point we have to address the infection. We have to say, what kind of boundaries do I need in my life? What kind of self-control do I not have in my life that's allowing this stuff to become toxic and infectious in my soul? So let's talk about how we're going to rebuild these boundaries and build. There's 4 things that I think we need to address with this red flag so we can build better boundaries in our life. One is our why. Our why. The thing about this entire psalm is that David shows us 2 things. He has determination and vision. He says, I'm determined to live this kind of life, and I'm also determined to have these kind of people in my life. It's showing us he has a forethought. We talked about this last week, right? It's not enough just to have hindsight, but we need what? Foresight. He says, and these are the type of people that I envision in my life. And it's amazing to me because a lot of us, man, we have bought all kinds of safes for our guns, right? We got cameras watching our houses. We've got dogs protecting our yards. And we've done everything we can to protect our valuable possessions, but most of us don't protect our souls. And it's this understanding that many people have a deeper concern for their physical land than they do their spiritual and emotional life. Like how many people take it serious that, man, I need to understand my why, because my why tells me I'm living by a certain value system, and that value system tells me where to set the boundaries. Are y'all with me today? And so think about this. Like when we go back to the proverb, how powerful is that picture? Because what we forget is that whoever wrote that proverb is writing from a certain time. We don't really fathom the power of that proverb because we don't build walls around our cities. But in that time of history, every city built giant walls. Like if you think about the city of Jericho, and when Israel had to march around Jericho, and then the walls fell down, they attacked. This was a big deal because most cities, they would create them with a large body of water that separated them from the land, but then they would build up these high walls because most cities were not wide, they built them up. They built them tall. So imagine, not only did you have these walls that were high that surrounded the entire city, which was the first line of defense in the city, but they would have to climb these, they would have to basically ascend to the top of this city to take out the city because they could see people coming from miles at the top of this city. And so the walls were the first line of defense. Now think about the imagery that this person who wrote this proverb gives us, that a city with broken down walls. Well, you know what would happen if those cities did not have those walls or they were broken down. People would raid. They would loot, rob, kill, destroy, take over the city. That's the imagery he's given us. Now, put that in perspective of your soul. He says, when you don't have boundaries or self-control, you are saying, you're allowing other things to come into your life and rob you, destroy you of your joy, destroy you of your peace, kill relationships. Why? Because he that is without self-control is like a city with broken down walls. Wow. When I understand my why, that's the thing I have to teach my kids is like, listen, we have to understand our why, our values, because those values help us set our boundaries. It helps remind us that I have a vision and determination. What's your vision for your marriage or for your family? You do realize that the most valuable things in our lives require the most intentional boundaries around them. And I don't know about you, but the state of my relationships and the state of my family should be the most valuable things in my life. Amen? Number 2, our words. So my vision and my determination is my first boundary. I can say, listen, I have a vision for who we're becoming. I know who we want to be. I know where I'm going. But the second thing is our words. We declare our boundaries. How many of you know that this is kind of the first line of defense when it comes to your boundaries, because you learn how to say no as a child, don't you? It's one of the first words we learn. This sounds so elementary, but you know how many people have an issue with telling people their boundaries? Because you're afraid of hurting their feelings. You're afraid that they won't love you. There's all this insecurity built inside of you, so you can't even express with your own words, this is my boundaries. I'm not going to tolerate this. I'm not going to tolerate addiction in my house. I love you. We're going to pray, but I'm not tolerating you continuing to manipulate my family. I'm going to say no to this. How many of you know just expressing boundaries is a big deal? And most people don't know your boundaries because we don't express them. Our words are our first line of defense. Check out what David says. This is powerful. I want you to listen to the language he uses. I will be careful. I will lead. I will refuse. I will not tolerate. I will search. I will not allow. Wow. Pretty clear, right? He wasn't like, well, I'm going to try. I mean, I kind of hope. He knew up front. This is why I tell my daughters all the time. You know, my oldest she's about to turn 16. Y'all pray for your boy. But this is why I tell my girls all the time. I said, if you live with values that are so well known and seen, you won't even have to worry about all these other guys coming to holler at you. They'll see you from a distance and go, I can't get into that city. I've got to go somewhere else. Like, she just had a boy this year. I mean, all through middle school, we survived. Now we're in high school. She's a sophomore. Now she's got a boy that likes her, right? First time. and he's actually a pretty good kid. He's still got a long way to go in my book, but like he's a good kid. But I told her, I said, you know why this young man who has good values, who comes from, you know why he is willing to text, because I have a rule that if a boy wants to text my daughter, they have to text me first. And so y'all might think that that's, too old-fashioned or whatever, but I'm just like, I'm a filter, like I'm the filter. And so he texts me or whatever. I was like, if he's willing to do that, he's a good kid. But I tell her, I was like, listen, I know that maybe you're disappointed that a lot of the other girls in school get a lot of attention, but I want you to know that if a guy's willing to holler at a bunch of girls, then that's not really something you want to be celebrated for. But if he's willing to say that one girl's worth having a conversation with and talking to because of her values, now you are understanding your boundaries are working. Because you don't have to worry about those ones that are knuckleheads that only want other things, right? But I'm telling you, when you express your boundaries and you put it out there in front, you'll get to the point where you don't have to tell people your boundaries. They see how you live your life from a distance. And they'll know, I can't manipulate them. I can't get them to do what I want. I can't put one over them because I've set that boundary. Are y'all with me today? Yes. And so some of us need to express that with our words. The problem is, if you're single here today, I want to encourage you with something. If you have a long list of attributes you're looking for in a mate, but you don't have a list of boundaries, that's a problem. I mean, like, sit down and express, hey, this is my boundaries physically. If they leave after the first date, then that saves you a lot of heartache and trouble. But at least you express your boundaries. Are y'all with me today? Like, it's saying, like, hey, I'm just want to, like, I've seen girls who are like, I just hope he's got blonde hair, he's 6'2". I hope he plays football. I hope he loves George Jones. And it's like he's an alcoholic and talks down to you, but hey, at least he likes the same music as you do. Yeah. But when you say, hey, here are my boundaries, are you cool with that? If so, we can proceed. If not, then there's the door. Number 3 are people. Who are the people that you allow in the gate? These are the people that you're saying, man, I trust them. Not only do I trust them to have access to my soul, but I trust them to hold me accountable. Can I tell you that is what's missing in most of our lives, is any kind of accountability? To say, man, I need people in my life to tell me, hey, you better shut that gate. I know that this person doesn't have your best interest at heart. You need to not proceed with this. How many of you know we need people like that? But here's the problem. Not only do you need people like that, you need ears to hear and listen to them. We talked about that last week. But it's our people. Look what David, how he expresses. He says, these are the people that do not have access to my life. Are you ready? He says, I don't give access to crooks and cheaters. Just get them out. If you're perverse, you don't have access. Gossipers or judgmental people. That means some of y'all can't hang out with church people anymore. Narcissistic people, liars, manipulators. Like, these are the list of people. That's what David just describes in this psalm. These are the list of people that do not have access to my life. That I'm building a gate and they're not getting access to my life. That's pretty powerful. And it's not that because I get it. Maybe you have that family member, that friend, that dysfunction, but you're like, it's not that I don't love you. I'm just saying you don't have access to control and manipulate my thoughts, my feelings, my emotions. Can I tell you, like, and we'll talk about this when we dive into some more mental health stuff later in the year. By the way, slight caveat, sidestep, bonus episode of my podcast coming out Tuesday talking about mental health and anxiety. If you want to check that out, madeToWinPodcast.com. All right, so back to the sermon. But can I tell you, there's a huge difference. This is powerful because this tells you whether or not, hey, do I have a healthy view of my emotions and my soul? Can I tell you there's a difference between being insulted and being offended? An insult is what people say to you to lash out at you. An offense is how you receive it. That you can actually be insulted without being offended. Because an offense is totally on you. It's saying, like, I take responsibility for how I receive this coming at me. And so what we do is when we surround ourselves with the right people and we have the right mindset of how to receive this stuff, it changes because some of us have allowed people who manipulate us, who talk down to us, who make us feel guilty, who make us feel insecure. I want you to know that you have full control over your emotions and you cannot allow that in your life. I had a family member who told me he had this friend that for years, I mean, he battled addiction and he was trying to help him. He was trying to give him things when he needed it. And he always called. He was like the number one phone call whenever he needed something. And he always helped him. Until this one time, he had lost his license due to a DUI. He didn't have a vehicle. And he calls. He says, hey, can I drive your car? Now, how many of you know? Like, that's best to say no. I think we would all agree, like, I know you need help, but I have to say no. He says, man, I don't feel comfortable letting you use my car. You don't have a license. You don't, like, all this stuff. And you know what he said? I thought you were a Christian. You ever have people pull that card on you? And in that moment, you feel like, oh, they're right. Like, I'm supposed to be a Christian. I want you to know, nope, that's manipulation. And you have the opportunity to say, I'm sorry you feel that way, but I'm still not letting you in. And some of you let people run all over you for the sake of Christianity. And you need to understand that Jesus does not call us to live in a dysfunctional place like that in our soul, to not set boundaries in our life. Are y'all with me this morning? Last but not least, our house, our mess. Our house, our mess. This is all about taking responsibility. The only way to build back better boundaries in your life is to take responsibility for the reasons why you didn't set them in the first place. It's saying I take full responsibility for who I am and what's in my life. It's saying, listen, if I see a mess in my house, I'm going to address it and clean it up. This is about accountability. It's about responsibility. I think we would all say that we are fully in charge of our finances. That we would say, man, I need to steward my finances. I need to know what's coming in, what's going out. I need to steward that well because this is my resource that God's given me to live and honor Him. I think we would all agree with that. And it's crazy because we will do more inventory to guard our resources and our finances than we will our own soul life, because what you got to understand is that when you fail to steward your finances, sure, you end up broke, but when you fail to steward your boundaries, you end up broken. And it's saying, have I taken full responsibility and accountability for my own mess, my own dysfunction? Because in order to do so, you have to start with your heart and your home first. That this is my most important place to guard. In fact, this is what David said in Psalm 101, verse 2. This is so powerful. He says, I will lead a life of integrity. Where? Where does he say? In my own home. Because how many of you know that that's the most important boundary? Now, here's the kicker. You ready for this? This is the one boundary David failed to protect. And it destroyed every other aspect of his life. Because I get it, some of y'all are great, man, you're great about staying physically fit. You're great about, man, I don't do this stuff. I'm on time for work. I work overtime. I'm faithful in all these areas. But you need to understand, I love what Charles Spurgeon said, who you are at home is who you are indeed. And David failed to protect the boundary of his home, and he commits adultery with Bathsheba, and it cost him a baby. It cost him a relationship with his other sons. It cost him the kingdom. It's amazing because some of you go to work and people are like, man, that guy, I just love old Bill, man. He comes to work, he's such a great guy. Boy, we laugh. And then you go home and people go, I don't see that laughter at home. Like, man, your husband or your wife, man, she's so giving and generous at work. And they're like, well, not at home. Some of us work hard to be successful, have all this stuff, but can I tell you, who you are at home is who you are indeed. It's the most important boundary. It's saying, men, you realize, like I know some of you work hard, you work overtime, but when you go home, do they get the best of you or they get what's left of you? I was watching the Book of Manning last night. It's the second time I've seen it. It's a good documentary about the Manning brothers. Archie Manning and his boys, Cooper, Peyton, and Eli. And it's powerful. And they talked about Archie Manning, their dad. And he said his greatest success was being a father. Because when he was in college, he was about to start probably his most successful college year in football at Ole Miss, and his father took his own life. And he said from that day forward, all he wanted to be was a dad. And so he raises Cooper. And this is what I thought was so cool, is that Archie didn't have to say this, but his wife said this, and all three of his boys in the documentary said this. They said, man, we're just grateful that we had our dad. Our dad was always there for us. And this is what his wife said. It said that in the 14 years he played in the NFL, he never had a winning season. He was always running for his life. He never had a good offensive line. So here he was getting battered, running for his life. I mean, imagine, at 14 years, it's like if you're a Detroit Lions fan, you know what that means. You know what that's like. And he says, but every Sunday when he'd come back, he would go and play with his boys out in the yard. And his own wife said, I don't know how he had the energy. She said, but he always saved his best energy for his kids. And I thought, man, what a testimony. That most people would say, man, my greatest success was this time, this game, or this moment. That my boys won Super Bowls. And he didn't mention any of that. He says, my greatest success was being a father. He set the boundary, and that was his most important boundary. Some of you need to understand that your most important boundary starts with your personal life. It starts at home. And that if I can start from there, then everything else falls into place, because when boundaries in your home aren't recognized, you put your family at risk. It's what I like to call the curse of the familiar. Because don't we always treat people closest to us worse than we treat common strangers? Some of you wouldn't dare talk to your coworker like you talk to your kids. You're like, but my coworker don't get on my nerves like my kids do. I get it. Do you ever catch yourself would you say that to somebody at work or at church? No. It's the curse of the familiar. It becomes so familiar to us, we take it for granted. And we don't say, I need to love them the most. And I need to love them the best. Some of us have to stop blaming others for trespassing when we haven't set up the boundaries. So 3 things that I want to challenge you with to help set that boundary today. One is inspect. To say, God, I need you to show me where I struggle to set boundaries, where I struggle with self-control. Maybe it's birthed out of some sort of dysfunction or trauma that happened to you when you were younger, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But it really is saying, assess my mess and clean it up. Because you are 100% responsible for your actions, your thoughts, your feelings. And say, I'm going to take control of that. I'm going to inspect where I need to set boundaries. 2 is respect. Respect yourself and be firm with your boundaries. Can I tell you something that's hard for us to hear? A lot of people treat us the way we treat ourselves. I love the greatest commandment Jesus gave was to love the Lord God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, right? Then he says the second one is equal to it. What does he say? Love your neighbor. Anybody know the rest of that? As yourself. He's saying you can't even give or receive love until first you've received the love of God. And secondly, when you love yourself and forgive yourself. And third is expect. 1, expect the boundaries to be tested. Like you're going to go home today and be like, all right, we're setting boundaries. I promise you tomorrow morning that boundary's getting tested, right? Expect test. But here's the thing. Also expect people to honor your boundaries. Because if you don't, this is all about accountability. And I'll tell you, if you struggle with certain boundaries, you need to set the boundaries and then hire a security guard to help you keep them, right? Find somebody in your life that's going to help you keep these boundaries. Now, I want to address this before we close. Because if you're like me, you grew up and your boundaries were broken, but it was out of your control. You were a child. You were a preteen. You were a teenager. I get it, because maybe you've heard this sermon and you're like, but I'm so angry because I couldn't protect myself. Nobody set boundaries for me, and I was taken advantage of. Coming from a person who's endured sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, all those things from my childhood all the way up, I want you to know 3 major things. 1, it's not your fault. Hear me when I say that, it's not your fault. Because some of you, here's the thing, it's not that you even hate the people who did this to you, you hate yourself. Because you wonder, what did I do to deserve this? What did I do? Why didn't somebody love me enough? I want you to know, let that go. 2, get help. Talk to somebody. That's one of the greatest things that I did, was start talking about it and getting help in my life. Talk to somebody. Let people know, man, I am hurt. I've been damaged. I've got all this trauma in my life. I need help. One of the greatest books that I read is called The Wounded Heart. If you're here and either you or somebody you love or know has been through sexual abuse as a child, it's one of the greatest books you can read. It's gospel-centered, takes you through restoration and healing your wounded heart. So it's not your fault. Get help. And 3rd, build back boundaries. Now. It's not too late to start now. I want you to know, no matter what you've walked through in your life, no matter what boundaries have been torn down, no matter how you've been taken advantage of, there is hope, there is healing, there is restoration. I am living, walking proof that God can restore everything that's been stolen and broken down in your life.